Hey everyone, it's Blake with FishBait. In this video, we're going to walk through configuring the Laserfiche Web Client. We've already installed it in a previous video, so we'll walk through all the different options, such as authenticating using the web client, setting up SMTP servers for outgoing email messages, accessing the configuration page remotely, and web client logging levels. So let's get started. To start, we're going to launch the Laserfiche Web Client configuration page using the Start menu. If you're doing this right after you did the installation, there is a checkbox to be able to launch the web client configuration page when you click Finish. So I'm going to go to Start, Laserfiche, and if we scroll down, we can see two different items for the web client. We have the Laserfiche Web Client 11 and the Laserfiche Web Client 11 configuration. So we'll open the configuration. If you receive this page, that's okay. I used the deployment toolkit to do my installation, so it automatically enabled HTTPS. And so this error is just stating that the link that I'm using is not using HTTPS. So all you have to do is come into the address bar, put in https:// and hit enter. And that will take you into the configuration page. So the first tab with the configuration page is the connection pane. And here is where you would actually set up your repository profiles. So you are telling the web client which repositories to connect to. You can install multiple web clients on different servers and have each one of them point to different repositories if you wanted to. Most people will set up a single web client installation or load balance them, but have them all connect to the same repositories. Since I use the deployment toolkit to do my installation, it actually registered or created my repository profile automatically for me. So we can see here my FishBait repository that was connected. It's using TLS or SSL to connect to my Laserfiche server. So what you would see if you did not use the deployment toolkit is this would all be empty. And you would simply need to click on Add New Repository. You can put in your server name. I recommend using your fully qualified domain name, the repository name, and then your connection options. The connection options are only used if you're doing repository authentication. If you are going to use single sign-on using directory server, then that is actually going to be set up in the services pane, and we'll talk about that a little later. So depending on how you want your end users to be prompted when they log in, if you are using repository authentication, you can choose one of these options here. If you choose the prompt for Laserfiche credentials, then users will be prompted for the Laserfiche username and password. And they are able to enter in their username using domain/username if they need to. If you use the prompt for Windows domain credentials, users will be prompted to enter their Windows domain username and password. And the same thing can be used as an alternative to Kerberos. And then the last option here on our repository configuration is TLS. The TLS is also known as SSL. TLS is the more modern way to refer to it. This is using TLS connecting to the Laserfiche server. So if you want that communication between your web client server and your Laserfiche server encrypted, this is where you would check that. And there are some things that you need to have in place in order for that to happen. You can check the help files if you need to. If you use the deployment toolkit, it does it for you automatically. So the next option that we have on the connection pane is allow switching repositories from within the folder browser. And what that does is when you are in the Laserfiche web client, I will pull mine up here real fast. If you had multiple repositories configured, you would actually see another drop-down item right here next to your username. where the end user would be able to select connecting to the other repository. If that's not enabled, then the drop-down doesn't show for it, and they would have to know the URL to access that other repository that you have. You also have the ability to show the Stay Signed In option in the sign-in page. And then down below that is configuring access to the repository. By default, all Laserfiche and Windows accounts are allowed to each repository that you set up. If you need to change that, you can come in here and say that only these users are allowed or these users are denied, and you would enter that information in for those usernames. If you have more than one repository, you can configure this per repository by using the drop-down up above. All right, the next thing that we're going to go into is the settings. In the settings is where we configure our SMTP server, and this is used within the web client if end users would like to possibly send links to other users to documents within the web client. They can also send documents if they're allowed to from within the web client, and this is the SMTP server that it would use. And then down at the bottom, we're also able to enable the idle disconnect. If you select that option, it keeps the sessions from timing out until the repository's idle time limit has been reached. So within the repository, you can set an idle timeout there, and so this would just follow that if it's selected. And then the last option on this page is the configuration page access. If you would like to allow remote access to the configuration page, you would select this box, and what that allows you to do is not have to be connected to the Laserfiche Web Client server in order to access this page. I recommend leaving that off unless you have a really good reason for enabling it, just for security reasons. The next page that we'll look at is services. And on the services page, we have 3 tabs at the top. So we'll talk about the general services tab first. Again, because I use the deployment toolkit, there's some things in here that were automatically selected for me. The first is the Laserfiche Web Client host URL. So what address are your end users going to use to access the Laserfiche Web Client? So you would enter in that address and make sure you always put a /Laserfiche at the end of it. Depending on if you're using an alias, a DNS alias for your server, you would either put in the fully qualified domain name or that alias that they would end up using there. We also have HTTPS redirection enabled. Again, that's from the deployment toolkit, but I would recommend that as well. You do need your SSL certificates in place in order for that to work. Okay, the next thing that we have is the Laserfiche app. And you may be wondering, why would I be entering information about my Laserfiche mobile app server here? And what this allows is it gives the option to provide a link to the Laserfiche app when browsing the web client from a mobile device. So the Laserfiche mobile app server has to be installed for this feature to work. And this feature does not need to be enabled to use the Laserfiche app, only to link to it from the web client. So you would simply come in and enter your mobile app server URL here, and that would enable that feature. The next option that we have is Audit Trail. When you turn this on, it asks for the Audit Trail server URL. And what this allows you to do is to be able to right-click on an entry within the Laserfiche repository and select Audit Report or Audit Trail, and it will launch Audit Trail and do a search for that specific entry ID. So if we actually enter in our Audit Trail server URL here, I'm going to come down and save that. And we'll go ahead and open the web client. And I have this document here. So if I right click on that document, you can now see I have audit report to be able to select. And when I click on that, it would launch Audit Trail. It will do a search on that entry ID. So in this case, it's entry ID 3, and it will pull back a report based on that entry ID. It's a pretty nice feature. It's a really easy way to perform an audit report based on specific entries. Our next option is this distributed computing cluster. For those of you that don't know what the distributed computing cluster is, when you use the Windows client, Laserfiche installs the OCR engine along with the Windows client. And so that's what allows you to be able to right click on a document or go up to tasks and select to OCR a document within the repository. Because with the web client, there's nothing installed locally on the end user's machine, they don't have the ability to do that. And so instead, Laserfiche has come out with the distributed computing cluster. It's a server-side piece that you have to install and configure, and I have some videos on that. And after you configure it, you can then come in and put in what's called your scheduler server name. And then users would be able to right-click on a document within the repository in the web client and select to extract the text from those documents. So that's what enables that feature for the web client. The next part is the directory server. So this is where I was saying when we were looking at the connection pane that if you are using directory server, this is where that is configured. So we would come in here, we would enter in our STS URL. You can verify that, and then you can select to only sign in with SSO. If you're configuring this yourself instead of having the deployment toolkit do it, I highly recommend not checking the only sign in with SSO to begin with, and just enter in your directory server STS URL and test your login that way. What that will do is it will still go to the Laserfiche Web Client login page, and below the normal login page, it will have a link to sign in using directory server. So then you can click that. It will then launch your LFDS STS page and allow you to test it. And that makes it so it doesn't automatically go to your LFDS STS page, which makes it a lot harder to get back into if you select this checkbox. So if for some reason your STS isn't set up correctly, you end up with errors. You actually have to go into the configuration files and change some settings there. And there is a white paper about setting up single sign-on for the web products that talks about which ones you need to change if you do that. But if you don't check this checkbox to begin with, it's a lot easier to get back in case there is an issue. And then once you verified that, yep, my single sign-on works, I haven't had any problems, you can come back into the configuration page and check that box. The next item we have is discussions. Some of you may not know what discussions is. It has been end-of-lifed at Laserfiche. If you've ever used Laserfiche Answers, that is built on discussions. So that's an application that Laserfiche came out with around the time they came out with Laserfiche Answers, and it was available, if I remember correctly, for Rio implementations. Like I said, though, it has been since end of life, and so they are no longer actively selling it or adding features or anything like that to that product. So you also may be wondering, how was discussions used within the web client? And what it allowed for was it actually added an additional pane when you were looking at an entry, and it was called the discussions pane. And that allowed people to actually have conversations about different entries within the repository. And so this is where you would go through. If you do have discussions, you can set that up and put in the discussions URL. If you are using the DocuSign integration, that is the next piece here. That allows you to send documents from the web client out to DocuSign and have them come back. There is additional configuration for that as well. One of those things that you need to install is the Laserfiche Web Import Services in order for this integration to work. But that's what this part is used for. So next we have the Office Online server. And this is a point of confusion with a lot of end users and also Laserfiche administrators. By default, Laserfiche supports previewing Office documents such as Word, Excel, and PowerPoint in the web client with the included Laserfiche Document Preview service. Laserfiche also offers an integration with Microsoft Office 365, which allows you to easily edit Microsoft Office documents on the web directly from the Laserfiche document viewer. This allows multiple users to individually or simultaneously co-author documents, enabling a streamlined experience to produce and edit content. The Laserfiche integration with the Office 365 utilizes what's called the Microsoft Office Online server. And that's what also enables your co-authoring. The Microsoft Office Online server is not a free product. Depending on what level of subscription that you have, it may or may not be included with that. So the best thing to do to find out if your organization has it is to reach out to your Microsoft sales rep and ask them about if it's included with your organization's subscription. If it is, Office Online is a little misleading. It's not hosted by Microsoft. You actually end up installing something locally in your self-hosted environment in order to set this up. So there are some instructions to do that. And once you have that, you can then get your Office Online server URL, enter that in here, and then you can select whether you want to enable simultaneous co-authoring and if you just want internal only. And the last thing on the services page is the direct share. So direct share is what Laserfiche calls a hybrid solution, where you are able to share documents from your repository in a self-hosted system and actually send them up to the Laserfiche cloud. It's not a full Laserfiche cloud. It is basically an area where you can share these documents, you can send them to specific people, and you can put restrictions on how long they are available to view. So all that is done using this feature here within your web client configuration. It's not included by default. You do have to get licensing for the direct share feature. So you can contact your Laserfiche solution provider and they can get you pricing on how much that feature costs. All right, and now the last page in the web client configuration is the diagnostics. And here you would go through and change the different logging levels. Only change these if you need to. Usually you won't have to do anything with them. You can just leave them alone. But occasionally you may be opening a support case with Laserfiche or with your solution provider, and they may ask for additional logs and ask you to change the log level so they can get that additional information to help troubleshoot your issue. By default, critical is the default setting that is selected. So you may want to take a look and see if yours is set to critical. If it's set to something else, you may be gathering more information than you need and filling up your log files with useless information. And then you can also enable tracing for the web client, as well as the repository access and what's called WinHTTP. In general, tracing should only be performed to troubleshoot specific issues, usually at the request of support. So again, leave that unchecked if you haven't been told to enable it. And that's our walkthrough of the Laserfiche Web Client 11 configuration. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. If you have, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and if you have any questions or ideas for additional videos, be sure to put them in the comments below. And until next time, keep phishing.